this presentation, I'd like to discuss the supposed human evolution, Apemen to humans. Is a monkey your uncle? The question is, did we evolve from apes, ape-like creatures, Australopithecus afarensis, or Lucy, Pithecanthropus alalis, in Latin means speechless ape man, or something else. And I put a banana here because we share 50% of our genes with a banana, or none of the above. And I show here scripture, Genesis, which gives the true account of how we came into being. So regarding the biblical account, the land animals were created on day 6. Man was created on day 6. Who was given dominion over every other living thing on earth in verses Genesis 1:26 through 28, and that would be man. How did God form man in Genesis 2:7? Of the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. So who named the animals? And that would be Adam, and this signified God giving dominion, rule, over the earth to Adam, turning over the power. And in Genesis 2:20, for Adam there was not found a suitable helper for him, who, as he did the naming. Because he realized that every animal type came through 2 by 2, but he did not have anyone comparable to him. So how did God form Eve in Genesis 2:21-22? From Adam's side. Some translations say from the rib, but the better translation is from the side. And it's from the side so that one woman would not come from the head to be overman, or from the foot to be inferior man, but to be his equal partner. Jesus confirmed this uniqueness of men and women and declared that marriage is to be between a man and a woman in Mark 10:6. In Genesis 3:20, and Adam called his wife's name Eve because she was the mother of all living. There were none living prior to her, no procession of ape-like forms gradually evolving into humans, as we call ourselves today. In 1 Corinthians 15:39, Paul writes, all flesh is not the same flesh, but there is one kind of flesh of men, another flesh of beasts, another of fishes, and another of birds. So why is this important? Well, because it shows that the various created kinds. So let's take a look at another view now and see what the evolutionary starting assumptions are. That man evolved from apes, some earlier ape that was common to both modern apes and man. The only permissible question is, from which ape-like creature did man evolve? Evolutionists do not believe that man evolved from any living ape today. Rather, they look at the fossils of men and apes to provide them with desired evidence. They look for any anatomical feature that appears to be intermediate or transitional. Fossil apes having such features are declared to be ancestral to man and are called hominins. We have seen in the past the term hominids. The hominin is the current terminology. Living apes are called hominoids because they are only similar to humans and did not evolve into them. So hominoid, the oid ending means like, so man-like is the meaning of that term. Notice the evolutionary assumption in the naming of them. Nonetheless, evolutionists are willing to accept mere similarities between the fossilized bones of extinct apes and the bones of living men as proof of our ape ancestry. Paleo means old or ancient. Anthro refers to man. Ologist, one who studies. So therefore, paleoanthropologist, one who studies ancient man. So what do they actually study? Casts of original specimens, measurements that are recorded by others, photographs taken by others, descriptions written by others. In terms of actual fossils, very infrequently, because they are not granted access due to the rarity and the fragile nature of these things. They are often locked up in vaults to protect them, and so students of these things write their papers and obtain their degrees based not on the actual fossils most often, but on these other items here. Well, let's take a look at just how rare they are. Approximately 95% of all fossils in terms of animals are marine invertebrates. That means the spineless critters that live in the ocean. 4.7%, in other words, nearly all of the remaining 5% are algae and plants. Of that 0.3% remaining, 0.2 are insects and other invertebrates, spineless critters. Only 0.1% are the animals that have a spine, and that would be the fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals, as well as man. And only the very smallest imaginable fraction of those are the primates, those that are the apes, the orangutans, baboons, gorillas, chimpanzees, those types, as well as us. In Genesis 6:7, the Lord said, "I will wipe mankind, whom I have created, from the face of the earth," because he was so unhappy with the degree of sin that had developed up to that point in time, 1,656 years after the flood. After creation week, and then brought the flood as the means of wiping man off the earth. And so this resulted in the burial of many trillions, if not even larger number of organisms all over the earth, and so we find fossils, either from the time of the flood or from post-flood local events. So the anatomical features that are studied are skulls, jaws and teeth, hands, pelvis and hips, knees and legs, as well as feet. So when we compare skulls here of the orangutan and of the human skull, you see that there's a significant slope, approximately 45 degrees, to the face of the orangutan, yet the bony face of the human is quite vertical at 90 degrees. So this is a very significant difference. In addition, the jaws and teeth are used. As I was taught in school, I had my biology class in the early 60s, we were taught that Ramapithecus was a predecessor to man in the line of evolution, and were presented with this drawing showing the similarity of the jaw. However, this stopped in 1977, as you see indicated here, because then an intact specimen was found, showing that indeed it was a chimpanzee jaw and had no human characteristic to it at all whatsoever. So other things used to evaluate these are the thickness of the tooth enamel, relative size of the molars and canines, and here you see gorilla with these monstrous canines that unfortunately are capable of killing people, and that has happened from time to time, even in recent history. Hands are another thing that are compared, and so you see here the hands of the chimp, and looking at the side view, you can see that it's not due to the joints, but to the bones themselves are curved, which shows them being well designed for grasping tree limbs and being able to hang with much less use of muscles and having muscle fatigue. On the other hand, you see here a front view and a side view of the human hand, and it shows that our bones are perfectly straight, and that the only way we get curvature is to bend the joints and use our muscles. So very different shape to the bones themselves, giving an overall difference in the shape of the hand. When it comes to the pelvis, you can see that the chimp pelvis is very different than the human pelvis. In the chimp pelvis, the location for the hip joint is flared very much out to the side, causing a much wider base for the legs and feet of the chimp to be much more spread out than in the human. This is responsible for the very rocking motion of walking that you see with the chimps and other primates. Because of that very wide base, they have to do that rocking in order to maintain their balance because of the wide nature of their pelvis. Whereas in the human, we have that much more narrower angling in of our hip joint, as well as having a 9-degree tilt in the thigh bones, the femurs, so that they angle in, bring the knees close in proximity to each other, causing us to be somewhat knock-kneed, but giving us a much narrower base. And so that's how we're able just to glide along very smoothly without the rocking motion that you see in the chimpanzees. And then here you see in these skeletal models the significant difference in the arrangement of the legs and knees as a result of these pelvic and femoral differences, thigh bone differences. Well, as we look at the feet, you can see that the foot in this primate looks very much like a human hand, with the great toe spread way out to the side, which makes it ideal for grasping, as opposed to our feet, in which the toes are pretty much straight forward, unless you have a bad bunion situation. And so we don't have the ability to grasp with the entire foot, maybe catch something between the toes, but that's it. Whereas these feet of the primates were made very well, designed, engineered, for being able to grasp onto tree limbs as well. Well, there are 3 ways to make an Apemen. And let's talk about these. Comparing by combining men and apes is the first one. Second one is to emphasize certain ape-like qualities of fossilized human bones, and with imagination downgrade humans to be more ape-like. Third mean is to emphasize certain human-like qualities of fossilized apes, and with imagination upgrade the apes to be more human-like. So, combining men and apes, let's look at the example of Piltdown Man. In 1920, Piltdown Man was broadcast as being a great find in a transitional form between ape and man. The actual discovery was a few years earlier than that. And in the town of Piltdown in England, there was a rock quarry outside of town. And this was discovered and trumpeted as being this transitional view. Well, even then there was controversy. Not everybody accepted it as a legitimate specimen, but there were enough who did and made a lot of noise about it and saying, here we have this great example of evolution from our home country, the land of Darwin. Well, it turns out that it was fraud, and that the skull of a human and the teeth of a chimp and the jaw of an orangutan were carefully put together. The teeth were filed down to make them look more human-like. Then the whole specimen was stained and then buried so that it could be discovered in the rock quarry. About 35 years later, in 1955 or so, other evolutionists said, can we take a look at this thing and examine it? And they did, and they saw the filing marks on the teeth and said, you know what, guys, this is a fraud. You've been had. So that's combining men and apes. Trying to make apes out of men, Cro-Magnon is a great example of fully human caveman who did beautiful artwork in the walls of caves and was fully human, had no ape qualities at all whatsoever, but they downgraded Cro-Magnon to say it was an antecedent to modern man. And then we have this infamous example of Nebraska man, in which a single tooth of an extinct peccary, not a pig as is often said, but a peccary. These are furred animals that have tusks and look something like a pig, but they're a different breed, different kind of animal. And so this single tooth from an extinct peccary was dug up and was labeled Hesperopithecus, meaning western ape man, because Nebraska at that time was in the west in the 1860s. And again, there was great controversy. Not very many evolutionists actually accepted this as being a legitimate specimen. But an artist with the London Illustrated News went crazy with this story and possibility, did this artwork that you see here, creating this entire family. And so even though almost all the scientists did not take it seriously, the public was inundated with this propaganda for evolution because of the vigor of the press and the evolutionary artist. Well, let's turn our attention to Lucy and making a man out of apes. So here you see the skeleton of the original find of Australopithecus, meaning southern ape. And you can see that the ribs are rather straight and they form a barrel-shaped chest, which is, more expanded. The human chest is formed by ribs that curve down and around from the spine to the front, and our chest is much more tapered by far than the primate chest. In addition, you can see that there's only one half of the pelvis, only parts of two different knees on each side, not an entire knee joint, very few fragments from the hand or wrist. Not a lot to go on there. So you really can't say anything about the hand. You can say nothing about the feet. And only of the skull is a part of the jaw and a little bit of the skull cap. Nothing involving the front of the face here. And so I want to focus for the moment on the pelvis. And as we look at these examples we find of reconstructions of Lucy in museums of natural history, it's just amazing how they give Lucy these totally human features, such as these hands and even the feet with a minimal increase in space from the great toe and the second toe. And when you look in a close-up here, you see that they give Lucy white sclera, the sclera being the tissue in our eyeball that's hard and firm and holds it together and protects the inner part of the eye. That's the part that surrounds the iris, the colored part of the eye. And so they use total artistic imagination to give white sclera to Lucy as she is gazing down, wondering how to evolve in the future, or gazing up, how to evolve into the future. And so you see here that they have given her white sclera. And so as I show you here the human eye with the sclera there surrounding the iris, the part that is the colored part, you see that this is very different than what we have in the way of living apes today with black sclera. And so this is totally, to be kind, artistic license and imagination, as opposed to any actual evidence that they had white sclera rather than the black ones we see today. Well, I'd like to give you a short video clip from a PBS special that was done some years ago. Dr. Don Johansson, who was the discoverer of Lucy, and together with Dr. Owen Lovejoy, talk about their find with Lucy and the situation with the pelvis in this specimen and its condition of being chimp-like and in making it become human-like. And so they presuppose that after Lucy died, some of her bones lying in the mud must have been crushed or broken, maybe by animals browsing at the lake shore. And then Dr. Lovejoy says, this has caused the two bones, in fact, to fit together so well that they are in an anatomically impossible position. What he means by that is that it's impossible for them to be human, that they're so chimp-like, it is anatomically impossible for them to be human. And so this is a problem because they want it to be a human-type pelvis. So then what they do is remodel the copy in plaster of the pelvis of Lucy and put it back together and apply a Dremel tool to it and make it look like a human pelvis, so that starting out with the chimp pelvis you see here on the left and the human pelvis on the right, and what Lucy looked like before they did their medical malpractice, they ended up making it look on the top right here just like a human pelvis. So this is an example of manufacturing, once again, the evidence if you don't have it, and broadcasting this on national TV and calling it science. It's rather a sad situation here. Well, as I showed you the skeleton of Lucy here, examination of this more closely by other evolutionary scientists since then have said that the thick upper extremity bones demonstrate limb climbing, and that limb climbing predominated over walking on two legs, that is, walking bipedally. And so this is consistent with them swinging from limb to limb, from tree to tree. And that Lucy had multiple fractures as a result of a severe fall from a height, maybe even from a tree that was 4 stories tall. So this makes much more sense than the made-up story of being crushed by the hoof of an animal at the side of a lake. Well, here is a representation of the purported family tree, the line of evolution from these various ape forms into transitions into human form. And so let's just take a look at some of these here and see what happens. So some of these end up being a catch-all and disregarded as being anything meaningful. Total disagreement about this, just, what in the world is it? And then we look at some of these, like Lucy, that just turn out to be simply an ape, not human at all. And then we have others that are ape, ape, ape. And then we have Ardipithecus ramidus. So initially, Artie was ballyhooed with a big amount of press releases and articles written or papers written by doctoral students, and showing how this is supposed to be in the human lineage in terms of evolving toward us. And here are the specimens. Specimen that was found. You see there's a lot of the head present, the skull and teeth, hardly anything of the chest, quite a bit of the hands and feet. And you see that these hands are demonstrating tremendously long fingers, much, much longer in proportion than the human hand. And yet they have the nerve to say this toe bone proves the creature walked on 2 legs. Here you have in Time magazine. Yet when you look at the actual evidence, this shows the bones from the specimen of Artie, and I'm highlighting in this yellow box the same bone that is shown on the article, but it was shown in this position, in the anterior-posterior position view, rather than the lateral view, the side view. And in this lateral view, you can see quite clearly that that finger bone is curved, just like an ape bone. So to say that this toe bone proved that it walked on 2 legs is just absolute misstatement. Well, let's take a look at the situation where they were found, that these bone fragments were found. So here is a map of Ethiopia, and you see this red rectangle blowing up that particular district. And then we turn from that and blow up the small portion of it again until you see this map of the locality. And from the scale bar, you see there that it's several kilometers, at least a kilometer and a half or more in the distance between the one location on the one far side to the other far side of these red triangles showing all these different places where these bones were collected from. And so this shows that these bones are not from just one location, and they're even split between different drainages, that there's a ridge there between the 2 triangles on the far left and the 3 triangles more to the right. And so to say that all of these bones came from one critter, or the same critter, I think is a real stretch. But the public is not aware of all this. So when you look at the details, the story and the fossil falls apart. Well, in spite of all that, Artie got a big round of publicity when they decided 10 years after the original round of articles that they needed to do some more drumming up of fervor for evolution. So this big splash for Discovery Channel was done for Artie, and there were a bunch of other things done with the press, articles, and the magazines, giving a big push on Artie. Well, as we return from Artie back to our diagram here, you can see that these are also ape, 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 and then we finally come to Homo erectus, upright man, And so here you see the skull, and it has a vertical face to it, so it's totally human, has no ape qualities to it, even though they talk about various specimens saying they can't agree. Well, they can't agree because it's too human-like. And so they say, well, maybe it's Homo erectus, maybe it's Neanderthal, who knows. And then we come to Neanderthal, and you see this artist's depiction of this stooped over form with this maybe transition from an ape-like gait to a human gait. But the original Neanderthal specimens were found in Germany, where it was a cold, damp environment in the post-flood period, as in the center of the continent, lots of clouds and rain. And without the sunshine, this specimen had vitamin D deficiency, a disease that we call rickets. In addition to that, there's evidence of arthritis as well. Rudolf Virchow, a famous German pathologist, examined this in 1956, and he classified it as 100% human. And this was 3 years prior to the publication of Darwin's book. And Virchow was such a well-respected pathologist that his textbook on pathology, that's the study of diseases, was used both in Germany and in the US and elsewhere well into the 1900s. So he was a very good source to rely on for characterizing this as fully human. And so then another problem is this, besides the rickets and the arthritis, is that the skull, the cranial capacity of Neanderthal is actually greater than modern man, and so that's going in the wrong direction. And in subsequent specimens of Neanderthal found in Israel, where it was much more sunny, did not have these problems with rickets and arthritis. And then Neanderthal jewelry, artwork, arrowheads for weapons, some pretty exquisite work there. And one of the most amazing things is this bone, this flute bone made from a bear bone with the holes drilled in it. And so physicists analyzed this and said that it had the perfect size and perfect locations to make the notes of the musical scale that we use today. So this took great ingenuity, great design, great intelligence. And so the question here is, you know, to make the joke about caveman, it's so easy that even a caveman can do it. And so here's this parody about, are you smarter than a caveman, and can you make a bone flute with the perfect pitch for the notes? And of course the answer is it would take a lot of training to do so. Well, in addition to that is the cave artwork as well. Exquisite stuff, and artists who are knowledgeable on how to capture motion in animals and artwork say that this is fine, fine work and unequaled with what we have today. So you see these beautiful specimens of the artwork. I wish I could draw half as well as this. Well, here's an article about DNA regarding Neanderthals and humans, and it says that they appear to have mated, and so I blew up this one paragraph saying, scientists have found new genetic evidence that they say may answer the long-standing question of whether modern humans and Neanderthals interbred when they coexisted thousands of years ago. The answer is probably yes, though not often. Well, that's misleading. That's from about 8 years ago. And today, much more recent article, we have that 35 to 70% of the Neanderthal genome persists in the DNA of present-day humans. Well, that's because they were human. And so there's no question about them being fully human. This is pretty straightforward when we look at the modern genetics. So then we turn to Homo sapiens, that's us, as we call ourselves, being self-aware, knowing self. And so when you take away the millions of years that are presumed through false dating methods, and take a look at the time frame in Genesis given to us by the history, and you look at this list of the supposed ape men, it turns out that they're either man, ape, or hoax, or a tooth from a peccary. So there are 0 transitional forms to be had. There are no ape men. And this example of the Pithecanthropus alalis was totally of the imagination of Ernst Haeckel, who was the priest of evolution on the continent from 1860 forward, when he read the German translation of Darwin's book on the origin of species, published the prior year in English. And so this is one of the many frauds that he perpetrated, promoting evolution, unfortunately laying down the foundation for Hitler to build on. So comparing chimps and humans, genetically we do have more in common with chimps than any other animal. However, the way the numbers are presented is quite misleading and leads the public to have a misconception that is very great. The comparison that you see here with the number 98.5% is talking only about the portion of DNA that is responsible for production of protein, for coding protein. And that is only 1.5% of our total DNA. The remainder of the DNA we have is for regulatory purposes, so that the tremendous complexity that we have can be created from turning genes on and off at the proper time in the proper amounts in the proper place. And also for structural purposes, imagine it this way, that DNA is not only the walls of the library, it's also the floors of the library and the shelves holding the books, the binding, the covers of the books, the pages that the text is on, as well as the characters that make up the chapters, the pages, the paragraphs, and the sentences, and the individual words. So that's why only 1.5% of our DNA is used for the production of protein. And of that, we are told that 98.5% of the genes are the same in the chimp and the human, but that is also a false claim here. But the public perception is that we're 98.5% similar to the chimp. And so there's the question raised, are we the same species? And so you see this magazine cover saying, chimps are us, and saying, you know, maybe the chimps should be reclassified as a human species. And so you see such results of this as the Spanish Parliament approving rights, human rights for apes, or about a lawsuit in New York City, do chimps have human rights? So unfortunately these ideas have consequences which are not favorable. The human genome in actuality has 3.1 billion base pairs being the individual nucleotides that make up the alphabet, the A, C, T, and G of DNA that make up the code of DNA. And the chimp one is 3.5 billion base pairs, so that there is a difference in size of 9%. Some even have calculated to 11.5%. So that blows the 1.5% difference out of the water all by itself, but the story gets much worse for the evolutionists' claim. When the human Y chromosome is compared to the chimp Y chromosome, direct comparison of the two, the Y chromosome is what makes men as opposed to ladies having 2 X chromosomes and men having 1 X chromosome and 1 Y chromosome. When you see this direct comparison, you see these black lines indicating these gaps with the ovals around them, showing that in these areas there is no correlation at all whatsoever. And so this was the computer program designed to look for the similarities in the DNA sequences here. And so the effect of the gaps in misleading data were minimized, and that's a very kind statement, a very kind way to put that. The actual direct comparison of the Y chromosome of the human and chimp is only 43% the same. So that is a huge difference. Less than half is the same. So then an attempt was made to compare the Y human chromosome to the entire chimp genome, and you see the different colors here to represent the different chromosomes in the chimp, telling the computer to look for anything similar anywhere that would align with the human Y chromosome. And so you can see again that there are tremendous gaps in this situation. And so areas where there were many repeats were simply ignored. and gaps were minimized again. And again, the whole assumption was that evolution happened, and so everything was programmed to say, yes, this happened. How can we make it show that it looks like it happened? Circular reasoning. So the assumed genetic relationship of the chimp and human in order to obtain the data. So the situation is not that we are comparing an apple to an orange with the one Y chromosome of the human to the chimp, but rather the apple to the entire orchard of all of the chromosomes of the chimp. So I chose a different fruit for each chimp chromosome to make the point of the orchard, not the apple to the orange. And so here you see that point made, that the human Y chromosome compared to the entire chimp chromosome here. Well, the next problem is the number of chromosomes. The chimps actually have one more chromosome than we do, which makes sense since they have a larger genome than we have. But they have numbered these so that the total number comes out the same, but compared to the number 2 chromosome in the human, the evolutionists have labeled the chimp chromosome 2A and 2B to avoid having a total different number. And so that is a result of them saying, oh, 2A and 2B combine to form the number 2 chromosome in the human. But this is simply not possible for several reasons. One of them is if the 2 chimp chromosomes were put end to end to combine to make the human chromosome, half of that DNA would be running in the wrong direction. DNA is extremely directional in how the molecules can move along it to copy the DNA or to make messenger RNA from the DNA, and half of it would be running in the wrong direction. Another problem is if these were to be combined as the evolutionists say, then there would be a break in the middle of what is a currently functioning gene, and this just simply would not happen. And there's a couple other reasons as well. But for the purposes of discussion, let's just say, okay, man evolved from apes, and let's see what actually needed to happen for this to be a successful situation for evolution. So there would have to be 40 million separate mutation events, all of them going in the right direction from ape to human, all of them being preserved, with nothing going in the wrong direction. And they all would have to be fixed in the population. In other words, it couldn't happen and then get lost. It'd have to stay and spread throughout the entire population. And this would have to happen in 300,000 generations with the assumption of the evolutionary time frame. Well, this comes out to an average of 133 desirable mutations having to occur every generation and becoming fixed and all running in the right direction. And you can see this is a pretty ludicrous situation. And this has been recognized as being insurmountable, in other words, a mountain that cannot be climbed. And this was recognized first by J.B.S. Haldane, an evolutionary biologist and mathematician, in 1957 with the data that they had back then. And so this situation became known as Haldane's dilemma, because a dilemma is a situation when you're stuck on two horns at the same time and you can't get off of either one, and there's no resolution of the problem, no solution to the problem. And so this was recognized 60 years ago, and that problem has only intensified since then, because now that we have complete sequencing of the human genome and the chimp genome, it's not that we need 40 million mutations to occur and to become fixed and to all run in the correct direction. It's 9 times worse than that now. 360 million separate mutation events would have to take place, go in the right direction, and become fixed in the population. And so this comes out to 1,200 mutations in each generation. So this is just beyond ridiculous. And so here is an evolutionist who is confident in his position, who says, I do not think there's any way to calculate the number. In the end, it's a political and social, cultural thing about how we see our differences, and he is correct. Well, when we do a direct comparison of the chimp and human genome, even though the claim was 98.5% in the 1.5% that codes for protein, a direct full comparison is around 85–86% similarity. So using that figure, some people would say, oh, so we're 85 or 86% chimp. Well, that kind of thinking is kind of ludicrous because we share 50% of our genes with a banana. So I don't know about you, but I really don't be caring to be labeled as 50% banana. You know, being nuts is one thing, but bananas, that's something else. So in 1 Corinthians 15:39, we have all flesh is not the same flesh, but there is one kind of flesh of men, another of beasts, another of fishes, and another of birds. So again, we have in Scripture the truth that there are different kinds that cannot be changed from one kind to another kind at all. So, Apemen, perhaps generations of students of human evolution, including myself, have been flailing about in the dark, that our database is too sparse, too slippery for it to be able to mold our theories. Rather, the theories are more statements about us and ideology than about the past. Paleoanthropology reveals more about humans' view of themselves than it does about how humans came about. But that is heresy. And indeed it is. So this Dr. Pilbeam must feel pretty secure in his position as well. Because if anybody hints of disbelief in evolution and in the possibility that something else was how we came into being, in great, grave danger of losing their academic positions. So we have the scientific evidence that confirms what Scripture says, that God created us. We did not come from apes. We did not evolve from some previous type of creature, but were made directly by God from the elements themselves. Thank you very much.